I don't know if you all have set up some sort of a golf bucket list accomplishment set of goals, but our featured guest today, who comes to us from the other side of the world, has accomplished something that I don't think I've seen anywhere else. And his immersion into the world of links golf in the last couple of years has reached a stage where perhaps there might be some counseling needed. And with that, I will introduce you all to Sam Cooper, who checks in with us. He's associate golf architect along with the team at Clayton DeVries and Pont. He's been on the road a lot, and he hosts a podcast called the Golf Badgers Podcast. Sam, you and I have never met until today. We've connected over Twitter. Believe it or not, there are some good things that can happen on Twitter. So thank you for doing this. How are you?
Delighted to be here. Thanks very much for having me, and to a part of the world that, unfortunately, despite working with a Michigan native in Mike DeVries, I'm not at all familiar as yet. So it's a privilege to be on. And yeah, I'm talking to you from Hoylake, another golfing part of the world, and we're gearing up here just down the road here to host the Open next year. Well, so maybe the eyes of golf will be upon us again.
I would think so. And just so you know, we are big fans and friends with Mike DeVries as part of that design firm. And here in our state, he has done some amazing things. And
yeah,
as we look at golf in Michigan, which right now, of course, is under some snow, and we compare it to golf in Europe, we always think about links golf versus, I guess, what you would say is parkland golf or resort golf and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And Sam, we have a need here at the very outset of our conversation, I think, to issue a clear definition of what links golf is. And the reason for that is because all too often I hear things like, oh, the course had fescue on it, so it was links golf. That's clearly not the case. Or it was near the water, so it was a very linksy course. And I'm like, well, that's also not it. So as the guy who has played 225 of the 225 links courses in your part of the world, how does Sam Cooper define links golf?
Oh, wow. Bill, it seems like a straightforward question to ask me. You know what? I think if you'd asked me halfway through this journey or 10% of the way through, I'd have just rattled off a pretty standard definition, something like the land that links the agricultural land, the parkland land, the rich fertile soils, the land that links it to the sea, and certainly in Britain, parts of Western Europe, and of course in your part of the world as well. But certainly in our part of the world, we have a lot of it, and it's the sandy hills, the rumpled landscape, and it is generally found in that little bit before the sea. But interestingly, I think that the definition of links is actually crazy, because the more prescriptive you are of a definition, the more places you risk excluding. And there are courses then that I've been to that don't meet the traditional definition that I've just given, but you've got to say they are links courses. And then equally, there are some that do meet the definition, they're not links courses. So really the only true way is, and this sounds a bit prosaic or a bit whatever, but it's really, you know it when you see it. You're on a links course, and it's everything. It's how the ball runs when it lands on the ground, and it's the little contours and how the land flows, and it is the proximity to the sea, and it's the type of turf that's on it as well. But it's the sum of all the parts, I think. And if you just have a few of them, then maybe that's enough to be a links, but then that becomes a gray area, and that's what makes it so fascinating, I think.
Well, it is fascinating. And, I've also heard, as part of that list of items you have to check off, does the turn matter? Or do you come back to the clubhouse for the turn, or are you out on the property and that kind of thing? There are so many different factors. And as you set out on this quest to play all 225 of them in your part of the world, I wondered how you were determining Were there choices that were borderline for you? Were there
Yeah.
some that were just not on the list? Like, whenever it seems like in the last 20 years, whenever a Ryder Cup is contested in Europe, for some reason they insist on holding it on a parkland course. And I've never understood why that is, except that it's probably more conducive to galleries and corporate hospitality. But I remember being at K Club many years ago for that Ryder Cup and thinking, this could be held in northern Michigan. This isn't special. There's no history here. In fact, the course was finished like a month ago. And so there are some places in Europe where it's not links golf. How did you go about determining where you were going to play?
Well, just before I answer that question, it's funny you should say that about the Ryder Cup. I completely agree. And funnily enough, the conversations in the media at the moment, where the next Ryder Cup in Europe will, or the next to be announced in Europe, they're talking about a golf course that hasn't yet been built. One that's just down the road from us, and it's not a golfing part of the world. I'm sure it will be a nice course, but you're right, they're not the classic historic linksy or even heathland courses that the British Isles are so well known for. It tends to be the Walker Cup that gets to play over those places, and it's so much fun to watch.
Why do you think that is, by the way? Why do you think Ryder Cup insists on Americanizing the courses when they're in Europe?
It would be pretty obvious answer. I think it comes down to the money, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And the Walker Cup tends to be, it's less invasive for the club. It's you're only giving over the course for it's typically a couple of days and a practice day, isn't it? We had the Walker Cup at Hoylake in 2019, which was our 150th anniversary. And you think about some of the places where they've been, before and are going to, like this or next year, it's at the old course. In 2017, it was at LA Country Club, and after the old course, it's at Cypress Point. I mean, it's a pretty good roster of places, and the Ryder Cup, by comparison, is certainly on our side of the water is far less inspiring, shall we say? So I don't know. I think the European side of things, it's our one big ticket, isn't it, to make some money, and the things that decisions that are made then I guess are influenced by that.
Well, and just to kind of put a button on that, just so everybody heard correctly, instead of making use of some of the historic properties that are everywhere throughout Europe, courses that are older than America, they are proposing to hold a future Ryder Cup on a course that has yet to be built, and I just find that to be such a miss of the target for an event that commands the attention of the golfing world. But let me get back to Sam's journey.
Yeah. So how did the list come about? Yeah. It was so in Britain in May, sort of March, April, May 2020, we had these COVID lockdowns, like many parts of the world did. And we were basically, we being my wife, Harriet, and I were just sort of stuck at home and twiddling our thumbs. Our business, we developed real estate, residential real estate, and we just didn't know what was happening. It was, do we take on new projects? Do we not? And we said, well, look, if we're going to take a bit of time away from the real world, then I've always had this enormous passion for golf course architecture, and I grew up on a links golf course and loved links golf. And it seems like we can't go abroad, we can't really travel, but if we've got a bit of time, we may as well do something with it. We're going to get to 2021 and 2022, and that time will come, and we can have either sat around waiting for the world to get back to normal, or we could have gone and had a bit of an adventure. So that's what we chose to do. And over that time, I just read every single book I could find, every list on the internet on links golf courses of Great Britain. So I just focused on England, Scotland, and Wales. I've neglected Ireland. I'll save that for when Harriet is willing to spend a bit more time on the road. And that's where the list came from, really. So it was an amalgamation of everything I could find, Twitter provided another bit of help and found some more suggestions from passionate people out there. And the good thing is, Britain is so small, you can drive all the way across it in a day, whether even from north to south. So it was a concentrated area for us to travel around. And we basically set off in September 2020. We did a bit of a van life, I think be the correct term, a sort of sprinter van conversion, and then set off on this adventure. So we did 3 months on the road, September through till just before Christmas. So whilst it's cold in Scotland, it's not covered under snow, and you can play, and it's actually drier than most people would think. So we were able to play. I played 75 golf courses over those 3 months. So some courses several times.
And your wife
because
played with you as well?
No, Harriet doesn't play, but if you said, some people raise their eyebrows when I say that and don't really understand, but I think if she loves being outdoors, loves
Yeah,
exploring,
my
and
wife's
you
the same
said,
way. She doesn't play. She comes along. She loves to see the beauty.
yeah, if I said, would you like to go on an adventure and explore all the coastline of the British Isles, then if you're that kind of person, then I think I can see the selling points alone in that. So, but remarkably tolerant. There's not many people I think would indulge my passions to quite that degree. So I'm very lucky.
So one more time, the geographic boundary of where you were contained for these 225 courses, what was it again?
So it was England, which is where we are, Scotland and Wales. So it's basically everywhere we can drive from our house.
Yeah.
So we're one contiguous country, of course, in the UK, but 3 sorts of separate bits of it, and it was our island, our large island that we covered. However, that said, there were plenty of little islands off it, especially off Scotland, the Outer Hebrides and the Orkney and the Shetland Isles, that your listeners will have undoubtedly be aware of, that you can take ferries and travel to. So they were included as part of that. But Ireland, Northern Ireland, and the Republic of Ireland, we left that because at the time we were setting out, travel over there was just not an option.
I remember prior to Ryder Cup in Wales, we came over to do some preview stories, and the tourism board of Wales set us up to do a number of different things, including to play a little bit of golf. And one of the places that they sent us was just a wonderful play. I'm guessing you've played it now, Royal Porthcawl.
Oh, special.
And absolutely fell in love with it, even though we played in some horrendous weather. We went through the whole spin cycle. So we started off in very, very cold, middle of the round, it was pouring. End of the round, we were dry by the time we were done because the winds had kicked back up again. It had gotten dried out. But I remember this. I remember in the clubhouse, very modest, ancient clubhouse, they had so many historic artifacts that I was lamenting that we hadn't taken or allowed more time to just soak in the history of that clubhouse. And I remember seeing on the table, they left out for guests like a logbook, where sort of like the club's diary, and it was still being added to whenever some noteworthy event were to take place, they would add to it. And so I'm very careful. I couldn't believe it was sitting out. It wasn't under glass. It felt like that ancient manuscript on parchment paper. And I'm looking back, and the dates are in the 1800s, and it says problem. It's written in very fancy calligraphy writing, and it's some club secretary's role probably. It says problem, club has run out of whiskey. Solution, club has purchased more whiskey. And I just thought, what a fantastic thing to note in the history of your place. And it reminded me that where you are doing all of this in this region, the game got its birth, the game became what it is today, and that history is still appreciated, recognized, and celebrated there more than it is anywhere else, probably in the world. So as you're doing all of this, are you also able to soak in an appreciation for where the game came from?
Undoubtedly. And it's part of where my passion for architecture came from, I think. So I'm very fortunate to have grown up playing golf at a club that is one of the historical sort of beds of golf, especially in England, undoubtedly in England. So our club, we call it Hoylake, that's the town, but the proper name is Royal Liverpool Golf Club. So Royal Liverpool was founded in 1869, and for England that's old. So there are three clubs that are older. Royal Wimbledon was slightly older, and Royal Blackheath is potentially the oldest of anywhere, but they played on heaths. They played on Wimbledon Common and Blackheath in London. Hoylake has been at Hoylake for its 153 now years, and the only other club that has stayed in the same place longer in England is Westward Ho, gained proper name Royal North Devon. I think that was 1864. So we're really old, but it's crazy when you actually look back. And so like we founded the Amateur Championship, we founded the English Amateur with the first Walker Cup, or the first, the first match between GB&I and the USA amateur match was held at Hoylake, and then the following year it was made into the Walker Cup based on the success of that. So the contribution to the game is massive. You know, Bobby Jones won the Open of his Grand Slam in 1930. There's like so much stuff has happened. Some of our early members were so influential in golf, but it used to be a Scottish game, you know, and going on the tour, to your question, you can see English golf is old, but Scottish golf is crazy. Like you talk about the artifacts at Royal Porthcawl. There's, if you go to the Honourable Company of Edinburgh Golfers, or Muirfield as we all know it, you know, they've got stuff there from 1744. They've got stuff. In fact, there's a great story, and I'm probably going to get it completely wrong, but their first captain was a guy called John Rattray, and John Rattray was a surgeon in Edinburgh, and this is around the time of Bonnie Prince Charlie and the Scottish, you know, the wars of trying to get Bonnie Prince Charlie back on the throne of Britain, and John Rattray saved the life in, I guess it would have been Culloden, but saved the life of Bonnie Prince Charlie and was sentenced to death for you know, being a traitor to the crown. But he played golf with the Lord High Justice of England down at Blackheath. So, you know, it's his golfing buddy, so he let him off. And it's 1744, and you know, here we are all of these centuries later, and you think of the people you meet through golf.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why it appalls me so much that the Ryder Cup committees all choose to ignore that when they come over to Europe. But I won't keep harping on that. I'm also reminded, Sam, that if you're going to play 225 rounds, you've got to have a good set of rain gear and a tolerance for weather that's not always going to cooperate. I remember being back in Dublin for Ryder Cup, and my friend and I went to play. I don't remember the name of the course. I know there were sheep all over it, which was really quite fascinating. Wow. The scorecard had a local rule on it that you were allowed free relief from sheep dip. That's the phrase that it used. But the day that we went out to play, the wind was, all I know is I could hardly stand up.
Yeah.
And as we pushed our trolleys out to where the starter was in his little hut, I said to him, I'm sure that for you, this is about a 6 on a scale of 10. And for us, though, it's a 10. And he looks at me and he says, oh, no, lad, it's an 11. And he said, I can't believe you're going out at it. And that's kind of how that day went. So part of the whole links experience for me, and I'm not pretending to be nearly as experienced at it as you, is the versatility in one's game to be able to play the ball down low, to be able to try your best to flight it differently. How did your game improve or get challenged through all of this? You living over there, I would guess, have already been accustomed to some of that. Here in America, if we can't hit it high and somehow back it up, we don't even think it's golf. You are used to these different conditions, hard and fast playing surfaces, and flighting the ball differently. How did your game get tested during all of this?
It's funny you say versatility. I would say that I am not a versatile golfer at all, because when I do go, when I venture inland and it's a bit softer, or I come over to States and play a bit of golf, then my game has become a product of the places that I play golf. And like you say, I play golf in the wind, and I play golf on firm turf. And if I'm 100 yards from the green, then my go-to club is probably like a 5-iron, and I just run it along the ground, because that's what you do. And then it doesn't matter whether it's blowing a hurricane or not. You just use the ground contours. And I take it to the extreme. Lots of my buddies, and we've all grown up playing links golf, and it's not necessarily always the best way of doing it, but it's certainly fun. And I mean, that's why we play golf, isn't it? But I haven't played of all of the rounds. You'd be surprised how few I played in rain. I managed to avoid the rain pretty well. Maybe I'd say less than a dozen rounds were it was raining, maybe a few showers, but proper rain
was there ever
rare.
a time on the journey where you thought, this was not a great idea? I think it's time to get back in the van and call it a day.
So wind is something that I have become accustomed to, very much. And one particularly memorable day was, and this is when Harriet and I were really questioning our sanity. It was...
Oh, hang on. Let's set the record straight. This was when Harriet was questioning your sanity. I'm not going to let her get swept into making all these decisions.
You're right. You're spot on, Bill. Harriet was wondering what on earth this guy she was married to was thinking. We were up in the Orkney Isles. So the Orkney Isles are about a 2-hour ferry north of the north coast of Scotland. So, we're up there, we're getting up there. And then it's this collection of islands. So you have the main, and then there are various islands that you then take ferries to get to the other islands. And there was one course, and I was umming and ahhing over whether it was actually a links course, to your point before, or whether it wasn't. But I didn't want to miss one out, and I thought, well, let's give it a go. So it was on an island, or it is on an island called Westray, and there's one ferry. There's one ferry in the morning, and there's one ferry in the evening. And the ferry in the morning leaves at maybe 5:30 a.m. and the ferry that comes back leaves at maybe 8 p.m. And we thought, okay, this is going to be a long day, but we got up early, went down to the port. It was biblical. Like, the rain was, you would not believe it was so wet, and obviously pitch black at that time, freezing cold, wind was blowing, and we get on this ferry. It takes about an hour to get there. We're the only people on the ferry. Our van is loaded on, and Harriet and I, along with our 2 dogs, because our dogs came on travels with us. You're not allowed to stay in your vehicle on the ferry, so we were off on the deck, getting rain sideways, and then we get to the island, and on this island there is literally nothing to do apart from this golf course. I don't really know why there's a golf course there, but anyway, it's Scotland. There are golf courses everywhere, but there is quite literally, there is no shop, there is no cafe, there's no pub, there's no, there is not one thing to do on this island apart from this golf course. So we waited for hours and hours and hours, hoping the rain would stop. And it didn't. It got to about 3 p.m. and we thought, well, we're in danger here of just sitting in the van all day and missing it entirely. So we went and scooted around the course, and it had some lovely holes. Probably wasn't a links, but we don't need to get bogged down into that issue for fears of compounding my my questions of sanity. But then so that was one of the longest days in the rain, and so there were times when I thought, yeah, what on earth are we doing here? But by and large, those days were few and far between.
Good.
And it was going to some remarkable places, scenery that you wouldn't believe, and meeting so many people. And it's been a trip that's quite literally changed my life. I don't work in residential property anymore, like you mentioned at the top of the episode. I'm lucky enough to work with Mike DeVries and Mike Clayton and Frank Pont in the world of architecture, and indulge my passion even now I finished.
Since you and I have not met until this very conversation, I'm curious because as you set out to do these things during the pandemic, where it was either sit inside or go do something adventurous that you would remember and talk about forever, there's also kind of like the real life aspects of it, like what are we going to do about our work with our residential properties? Or how about this? How are we going to pay for all this? So in the world of media, of course, you try to build it into a content plan, and maybe you go and find sponsorship and that kind of, it doesn't sound like that's what your concern was, or but I have to think at some point, and I don't know Harriet, but at some point, perhaps she said, hey, Sam, I have a quick idea or question for you. Before we go and freeze ourselves to death in sideways rain on a ferry at 5:30 in the morning, are we going to go broke doing this? How are we going to make this work from a practical standpoint? What were those conversations like before and during this journey?
Yeah, it's funny. I guess we were no different to anyone else in that you set off in your career and you have the blinkers on, and we'd been growing our business, and from university we met in college, and we've been together since, and we built a business together doing the real estate stuff, and we'd always just gone from sort of one project to the next and tried to grow a portfolio. So we were very lucky in the sense that we had a bit of breathing space we didn't need to from day one, but of course, we quickly had to turn our attention to those very things that you mentioned, and we sort of were fortunate to be able to generate sufficient income streams from doing tour related stuff. So what I mean by that, first up, I work with a guy called Joe McDonnell, who, if any of your again, if your listeners are on Twitter or Instagram, there's a good chance they will have seen something that Joe McDonnell has done. He creates these beautiful pieces of artwork, plans of golf courses, maps that have this almost three-dimensional texture and quality to them, and they're two-dimensional prints. The one that will have had the most traction on social media is the Old Course, as you might have expected last year with the Open there. So we sort of developed this product, or really Joe did, but I sort of turn my hand to surveying and create these three-dimensional digital models of golf courses, and really that was how I got to know the guys at CDP as well. So we started selling those as a product, and they have done really quite well. They're just so very popular, and now I think there's opportunities to, now I'm back to turn those into a more established business or proper business, and I've done a fair bit of white label media stuff for some clubs, and really it was just again embracing the bit of entrepreneurial spirit, I suppose, but embracing the fact that we were able to be remote, and we were able to travel to places, and we were able to be on golf
Yeah. Yeah. And
courses,
I remember
and the
saying,
opportunities.
yeah, I remember saying numerous times at the beginning of the pandemic in some of the other podcasts that I host, that you're going to be faced with some choices as the world shuts down. And some of them are, I'm going to become a Netflix binging expert. But the more profitable investment of one's time is that I'm going to come out of this on the other end in a much better and different place than I am right now. Maybe it's from a physical fitness standpoint. Maybe you've always wanted to lose the weight. Now you're going to do it, and you're going to take this time. And that's why the explosive sales of at-home fitness equipment went through the roof. Right? And then, of course, most of it collected dust. And then I got to buy some of it on Facebook Marketplace from people who'd never used it. But we had this unique window of opportunity where the golf industry thrived for many of the same reasons that you're mentioning. And then we have, of course, people who now, as we talk, you and I are talking in the middle of November, there are people who, as we come out of the pandemic, who are regretting how they spent their time because they meant to do it right. They meant to do it well. And they got to the end of it and they realized that they really had just binge watched everything out there, and that was about it, right? So they've kind of wasted an opportunity that we hope never comes back around again.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you've become expert in, I would have to think, advice giving for travelers who want to come and do a smaller version of what you did. I can't imagine how many questions you're being asked by the group of 12 buddies from the Midwest of America who are thinking, what a dream. We don't have to play all the courses that are on the famous list, because there are some great golf courses that most people have never heard of. So when Sam Cooper is now, whether it's on social media or in other ways, approached by golfers who want to experience just a little toe in the water of what you experienced with your 225 rounds, where do you start? What's the advice you would give to those groups trying to put a trip together?
That's a great question. Normally people just say, what's your favorite golf course? And but that's a proper question. I think the real learning, the things I've learned above all others from being on the tour is the depth of fabulous golf courses, especially in Scotland, but generally across the British Isles. And the mistake that I see people make time and time again when they come over and try and put a tour together, you've got the different groups, there's what we would call perhaps the posh way of doing it. So, money's no object, and you see the guys sort of helicoptering from St Andrews up to Dornoch over to Turnberry, and then they might come down and play Hoylake because we've got the Open next year, and Birkdale as well perhaps, and then go down, play Royal St George's down in Sandwich, and I would imagine those guys, sure, they're going to have a fabulous experience. They're playing the cream of the crop. However, they're not going to have any context on where they are and what they're doing, and there's no authenticity in the experience. Whereas if you spend a bit of time in an area, the enjoyment I think you'd get would be tenfold. And of course, it's a small fraction of the cost of doing it that way as well. But even when money is absolutely no object whatsoever, I still think it's a far better way of doing it. Whilst Britain is tiny, especially compared to America, geographically tiny, it is so densely stuffed with great golf courses that you still only have the same number of hours in the day over here. Well, maybe we have a few more in the middle of summer, but generally speaking, you still have enough energy and enough. Maybe you play 36 holes in a day max. If you do that non-stop for a week, then you're probably going to be too tired to actually appreciate and enjoy some of the places that you are playing anyway. But the real skill is, or the real benefit from my tour is going to the places that you wouldn't go to if you're just doing a greatest hits tour.
Mm,
So I'll give you an example. Up in the Highlands, the Scottish Highlands, I mentioned Dornoch, and Dornoch is one of my absolute favourite courses. I think it's extraordinary, and it's a beautiful place. But the town of Dornoch is a wonderful little town. It's in the relatively, it's in the absolute middle of nowhere, but it's this beautiful buildings, beautiful people, just so hospitable, and the golf course is one of the very best in the world. But people know about that place, and people will also probably know about Skibo Castle, which was the Scottish home of Andrew Carnegie when he retired. So there, and Castle Stewart, or Cabot Highlands as it's now been rebranded as they've bought it. So those places are maybe the three that most people would play. But scratching the surface, you've got Golspie, you've got Brora. Brora became well known over the pandemic because they almost went bankrupt, and No Laying Up, I think, did a lot of. They've been there on a tour and publicised it to a degree, and but it's a brilliant golf course. And Golspie is a fabulous golf course. There's Tain, there's Fortrose and Rosemarkie. There's one of my favourite little 9-hole golf courses just around the coast called Durness, and Durness is the most staggeringly beautiful golf course that you can imagine. It's mountains and locks, and it's not really a true links course, but I would challenge anyone to go and play that and not just be totally in awe of how you can have golf in surroundings as beautiful as those. So the Highlands is somewhere that I'd say, look, don't go for one day. Don't take the chopper from St Andrews to Dornoch and then come home again, because you're getting a part of the experience, but a small part.
yeah.
The best thing about it is the tranquility and the beauty, and some of these other places, and the fact that it's quieter than maybe East Lothian, where Muirfield and North Berwick are very popular, or Fife or Ayrshire, some of the better known regions in golf, in Scotland for golf. Go and discover something off the beaten track, and it's the courses that are second and third on the list that will sort of they're the ones that you will remember far more than you expect. And that is the great benefit of the tours I've been on, and what I would recommend your listeners absolutely take the time to do.
Okay, so a remarkable tour that you took, and obviously you've immersed yourself into all of it, because your recall of each of these different places is really quite impressive. I don't see you looking at a lot of notes. I don't see you, I mean, maybe you have some, but I don't see them on the Zoom. I just think it's very cool that you have that perspective of, I don't need to cram in a hole of golf for every second that the sun is up, because to me, the approach that one will benefit from and fondly remember the most is the one that says, I want to remember the experience.
Yeah.
I don't want to miss out on the character of the places that I'm going. Excuse me. It's not a 36, a 54 hole day. That's not, to me, you can do that anywhere. Why go all the way overseas to miss out on the culture and the heritage and the history of all that? So, Sam, my last question for you is, what's next? Are you planning another version of this at some point? Is Harriet make you put your hand on a stack of Bibles and swear to never put her through this again? What's in the future for you?
No, I think Harriet is a little more pragmatic than that. She knows that it's something that has been such a large part of our lives, certainly for the last couple of years, and such a rewarding and fulfilling part that we probably won't do it in quite the same way. We probably won't go and say, right, okay, let's just go for 3 months or 6 months or whatever, and go and play everywhere. But I would like to see all of the links courses of Ireland as well. But before that, long before that, I want to write up this properly as a book,
Yeah.
And I've been taking, I said I did a bit of white label media stuff, photography and videography and things are something that I've enjoyed doing as well. So I need to go through all of the hard drives of video footage that I have, which I've barely even looked at yet, and spend our winter here just sifting through, try and make a few films, write up the book, and of course, with my role at CDP, it's great to be able to put in action some of the things that I've seen and learned, and my opinions and views on architecture that I've challenged and really tried to learn along the way as well. So that's my immediate focus, is actually going through it once again and reliving it in word and picture form, long before I go out and try and conquer the next Rook of Links courses.
Well, if at some point in your work with CDP, you end up making your way here to the States and you get a chance to come to the home area of Mike DeVries, I do hope we can get together, reach out, and I would love to just hear more stories from this journey and from just your passion for the game, because it does come through really quite clearly. Thank you for connecting and responding to a DM on Twitter. Remember when Twitter existed, everybody? It was fun, and that's how Sam and I met. And so thank you, man. I love hearing stories from somebody who appreciates the character and the nature of the game. And you clearly have that appreciation.
Bill, my absolute pleasure. Thanks for reaching out.